Hi, thank you for joining me on the Path for Health podcast. My name is Brandy Lloyd, and I will be your host. I am a functional nutritional therapy practitioner and personal trainer. I've had a long career as a personal trainer, but about 10 years ago, my health status began to unravel. I eventually was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called spondyloarthropathy. This is an inflammatory arthritis that affects nearly every joint in my body, including my spine. After a long road of discovering food allergies, incorporating stress management techniques, focusing on time on gut healing and hormone balance, I have finally found the restoration for my health. At this time, I am prescription free and hope to remain that way, but I'm open and grateful for whatever lies ahead. Most of my time is now spent helping people just like me, people who are trying to find answers to improve their health through diet and lifestyle changes. This podcast is for educational purposes. Please consult your doctor before making any changes based on what you learn here. My goal is to educate and inspire you. So please don't forget to leave a comment and share this podcast with your own circle of people. And I hope you reach out to me too. I have many different types of educational platforms and support. Now let's get on with the show. Hi there. Welcome back to the Path for Health podcast. Today, I thought we would talk about a rather important subject to most people, and that is dairy. Should you eat it? Should you pass on it? Is it okay if it's occasional? Is raw milk better than ghee? What about fermented? All of these questions. So before we get going, number one, I'm going to say we're going to address all of those things. So listen all the way through if you can. But first, I'd like you to put yourself in the place of one of my new clients. You're sitting next to me or across from my desk, and these are the words that I say next. So, based on your current health status and what you'd like to see in your health, I think it would be wise for you to omit dairy for the next 30 days. How do you feel about that? What does that do to your brain? To be honest with you, the look on most people's face is like I just told them they needed to water fast for the next 30 days. Dairy is a difficult and often controversial and emotional subject, even in the food and wellness industry. But rather than tell you if you should or shouldn't consume dairy, I thought that I would educate you and just let you make your own decision. Okay, so let's start with the basics. You are a mammal, and like most mammals, you nurse your young. Now, many scientists believe that species-appropriate foods, including milk, aka dairy, is the best choice for our young. But why? Well, the whole purpose of milk is to encourage growth and weight gain and to do it as fast as possible. Scientists actually call this time frame a dairy window. So since we are human mammals, I'm going to start talking about humans. Our human babies, when they are born, can't eat the same foods that we do as an adult. So milk, aka dairy from the mama, is specially and specifically designed to meet the nutrient needs of that baby during this very important window. Now, this window closes depending on the individual, but typically it's between the ages of 3 to 6. I'm just going to call it 5. So milk or dairy is made of all 3 macronutrients: carbs, proteins, and fats. In fact, it is made in perfect ratio. This ratio blend is perfectly designed for growth, and that includes weight gain. One of the ways that we know that a baby is thriving is to weigh it, right? You go to the doctor, they weigh the baby, they measure the baby, and we assume that if the baby's gaining weight, then the rest of the systems and developments and functionalities of the body are on track for good health, right? And if not, we start to get concerned. Now, milk is so important and specifically designed for that individual, that one baby, that one mama, that one baby. And unfortunately, modern day formula doesn't even come close to replacing breast milk. But we are getting closer every day and have more natural alternatives, but nobody argues that breast milk is not the best. And sadly, some women have issues with breastfeeding, whether it's their schedule or they have physical conditions. And that's why I'm very grateful that this is an important topic and an important study and area of research because we're trying every year to make a better alternative formula. But we can all agree that breast milk is the absolute best if you can. Now, back to this window. We know about this window because we know about a certain enzyme that we have in our bodies called lactase. The carbohydrate factor in milk is lactose, or milk sugar, if you will. So to be able to break down this milk sugar in your body, you need the enzyme lactase. That's Lactase. Whenever you're looking on the ingredients, especially for digestive enzymes, if you see a word that ends in ASE, like lactase, then that cues you that this is an enzyme. And enzymes are little spark plugs that can make things happen in the body. So these carbohydrates, or these milk sugars that I'm talking about, are actually naturally inflammatory to the body. Now, lactase takes lactose, that's the milk sugar, and turns it into galactose and then onto glucose. From there, our cells take the glucose into the Krebs cycle to ultimately end up with ATP. That's energy that our cells use. So children under 5 have plenty of lactase to get this process handled. Did you know that as you age, your lactase gets lower and lower? This was actually not surprising to me considering the population that I work with that have a problem with dairy. Most of the people that I work with are north of 35, probably closer to 45 and 50 to be honest with you. So 75% of the world's population actually have insufficient lactase enzymes, and they can't digest dairy products effectively for nutrient absorption. And that's the end game. We want to absorb those nutrients. I commonly refer to myself as a nutrivore. It's not so much a specific diet that I'm following. I'm really looking for certain nutrients that are going to provide my body with what it needs for functional health and development and longevity. So, how many people have you heard say, I just can't do dairy anymore? When I say dairy, I mean all mammal milk. That includes goat and sheep and camel and cow's milk and so on. So some people have a very quick and very extreme reaction to the poor digestive process that is a result of an inefficient lactase amount in their body. They get bloated, they get stomach aches, they have diarrhea, maybe skin rashes, even things like eczema within an hour or two. Now, some people have a more mild response, like a headache the next day, or constipation, or stiff joints for a day or two. Even some mild swelling, like you can't get your ring off, or you just kind of feel puffy, or just kind of like tired and sore the next day. So everyone is a little bit different. That's why some people have an extreme reaction and some is more of a crock pot. And for a lot of people that consume dairy on a regular basis, they don't realize that this is just a reaction. They just kind of say, this is just the way I am. This is kind of normal for me. But everyone is a little bit different, and I like to call that bio-individuality, and I like to make sure that I remember that with all of my clients. I don't know if you have heard or read any of the research by Dr. Walter Willits. He's from Harvard. He's a longtime nutrition scientist, and he argues the mere fact that 75% of modern humans have an issue with dairy should tell us it's not a nutritionally sound food choice. But what about the people in Africa or in the mountains of Nepal, right? These little indigenous isolated cultures. They practically live on dairy. Well, this actually gets really interesting. Our bodies are absolutely amazing. Those isolated cultures have very little lactose issues in them when they've been tested. And it looks as though, this is the best guess from our scientists, people way smarter than me, but it looks as though because of their environment, their bodies have somehow adapted to receiving nutrition from dairy. Not all dairy that's very specific to their locale, where they're living. But truthfully, you have to admit, this is a very small percentage of modern man living in these types of environments. It's a rarity. But I'm talking about the bulk of the human race. The bulk of the human race, when you take those people into account, 75% have issues with dairy. Okay, so we talked a little bit about dairy, the carbohydrate being lactose or milk sugar. Now let's talk about protein. There's actually hundreds of different proteins that you can find in dairy, but the two most common to cause issues with humans are casein and whey. Casein and whey are on their own just inflammatory to most bodies, especially to your skin and brain health. I know many people who develop a skin rash or keep a skin rash, something like eczema, due to their regular consumption of dairy. In most cases, you can look to casein and whey as the culprit. So, for many people, giving up dairy is a choice they just have to make because it leaves them running to the toilet. But what about those nutrition shakes that secretly contain whey? A lot of people don't even know where whey comes from. And it's allowed to kind of sneak into their diet and provide some of these smaller yet nagging and often cascading or compiling symptoms. And they're just completely putting it out of their mind because they're thinking of cream cheese and cheddar cheese and gooey pizzas and stuff like that. They're not thinking about the whey found in their shakes. So, back to casein and whey together. Both of these have been attributed to more subtle inflammation in the body that presents in joint inflammation and sadly migraines. If you're like me and you have an inflammatory arthritis, then this is one of the main reasons why I personally stay completely away from or avoid as much as I possibly can dairy. So, did you know that if you are sensitive or intolerant in any way to gluten, you should avoid dairy? Why? Because the gluten protein and the casein protein look almost identical to your body. It's kind of like a mimicry situation, or maybe not so much a mimicry, but just really making the wrong choice. Like, wrong guy. Casein is not gluten, but it happens frequently enough that people like myself that have a legit non-celiac gluten sensitivity have a legit casein sensitivity. They look alike, like twinning. I have found it so much easier to help people transition to gluten-free food options than dealing with dairy. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But I urge you, if you have an autoimmunity or suspect that you do, then I highly recommend taking both gluten and dairy out of your diet. So, can we talk a little bit about leaky gut for just a minute? I know that this is a common topic these days, but I want to be sure that you have all the basics down. So I want to keep this super simple. Number one, you chew your food and it travels down your esophagus into your stomach. Now the protein, which hopefully was in your meal, hits the stomach acid, and this is where it gets broken down. Once that is complete, all the food, now called chyme, enters into your small intestine. In fact, the first part of your small intestine is called a duodenum. And this is where absorption begins to take place. Now, your intestine, your small intestine, is more than 20 feet long. And it's like a big tube, and it is lined with little finger-like projections called villi. And believe it or not, on the top of the villi are microvilli. So if I were to open up your open up your small intestine and account for all of its total surface space, it would cover an entire tennis court. That's crazy. So this is to allow maximum opportunity for nutrient absorption. The carbs, fats, and proteins need to be digested and broken down into super small particles for the body to transport and deliver to all the cells for nourishment and ultimately that ATP that we talked about earlier for energy. This is how we fuel that mighty mitochondria or our cellular powerhouse. So, after the chyme travels all the way through your really long small intestine, there really shouldn't be much left. And that's when it goes through a little valve called your ileocecal valve. It's over near where kind of sort of your right ovary is and into your large intestine. This is also called your colon or your large bowel. Now here, the final vitamins and minerals are absorbed and excess water is recycled back into the body and the rest is considered waste and pooped out. So the bacteria that live in your small and large intestines are considered to be your gut. Every time I say your gut, that is the area that I'm talking about. A leaky gut is when the wall at any point of the small intestine is damaged. and becomes actually porous. And undigested food particles, mainly proteins, can enter the bloodstream. The official name is intestinal permeability. I just like to keep it simple and call it leaky gut. It definitely paints the right picture, and it is bad news. The immune system has little patrols that circulate in your bloodstream to detect invaders such as these ill-placed proteins, and your own body will create antibodies or special troops to take out these invaders on site because these proteins weren't introduced to the body in the right form and just is basically undigestible, unusable for the body. So undigested proteins and fats are a big cause of leaky gut and are often linked to chronic illness such as autoimmunity. They aren't the only reasons, but it's a very, very common reason. And it is safe to say that if you have autoimmunity, you have leaky gut. If you have asthma and eczema, if you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, a lot of these autoimmune diseases, I believe there are actually over, and it's autoimmune dysfunction symptoms, I should say, like asthma is a symptom, the skin rashes like eczema, those are symptoms. There's like a 99.9% chance that you have a leaky gut. And we're going to talk more about how to address leaky gut and what to do about it and some of the testing and some of the protocols in another episode. But did you know that daily consumption of things like gluten and alcohol and excess sugar can actually cause leaky gut? That list also includes dairy. So, did you know that dairy actually causes leaky gut on purpose? It's not just an allergic or intolerant situation. I was talking to my son about this just the other night because two of our daughter-in-laws are nursing two of our grandsons right now. So breastfeeding and this whole development thing is really fresh on their minds right now. And I have to tell you, I also nursed three of our sons, and it is a commitment. And we're so proud of the girls who, one of them is already back to work, and yet she still takes that extra time to make sure that she pumps the milk. And so Hayden, our son, can still have the baby and take him fun places like they came over here last night. But I want to get back to what I was saying to Hayden just last night, is that dairy, including mother's milk, including breast milk, causes leaky gut on purpose. Now, most of you know that breastfeeding improves a baby's immune system. Now, this is why. The dairy creates a leaky gut so that mama's antibodies can flow right on through into the baby's bloodstream quickly. The baby's immune system learns from the mother's antibodies and starts to create its own. How incredible. Every cold or virus or bacteria that the mom has lived through, she basically gives the blueprints of those antibodies to her own child, her own little baby. Now that is a good situation for leaky gut and just straight genius. We are so amazingly created. So what about it if you are over 5 years old and you consume dairy? What purpose does that dairy serve your own body? Actually, science is telling us none. In fact, it's more of a problem. Like I stated with the proteins casein and whey, when your body has now started or has a chance to develop an antibody against them, especially if you have autoimmune disease dysfunction or disorder like myself. So dairy does also dairy also increases mucus production in the body, which is why if you had your tonsils removed at any point, they say, no dairy, no dairy. We don't want the extra mucus in there. And in all other facets of life, excess or excessive mucus is often a sign of inflammation. So that's another little piece of the puzzle to consider. If your goal is to reduce inflammation in your body, then omitting dairy is a great choice to make. I raise my hand in my own life for that because science is actually showing us that it's inflammation that is the root of all chronic illness and disease, and that inflammation often starts in our gut. So we've talked a lot about the carbs in milk, the milk sugar, lactose or milk sugar, and we've talked about a couple of the proteins in milk, the casein and dairy. And when I say milk, I mean dairy products, cheese, whatever form of milk, right? But what about the fat? Let's just get this out of the way right now. Cows or other dairy-giving mammals that are raised outdoors in the fresh air and the sun that eat pasture and not grains, they're the best source of dairy, okay? Free from antibiotics, growth hormones for increased milk production, or any other nasty chemical conventional farming uses to make a bigger product. All right, so we're going for quality. Now, the fat content that is in dairy varies on the type and form of the dairy that you are choosing. But the ratio of the type of fat is pretty typical across the board. So most drinkable dairy products are 65% saturated fat, 30% monounsaturated fat, and 5% polyunsaturated fats. And really, the best nutritionists in the world are saying that is a practically perfect combination of fats for both today's health and longevity. And just protecting us, right? That's what longevity is all about. So the quality of the fat type and the ratio is both great when we consider dairy. So we know that the carbs or milk sugar found in dairy is inflammatory. And we know that the proteins found in dairy, like casein and whey, are often inflammatory, at least for about almost 100% of us if you have an autoimmune issue. But what about the fat? Well, it depends on the format or the delivery of the dairy. Let's go over the worst to the best. If you're going to consider keeping or including or even reintroducing dairy back into your diet, let's go worst to best, okay? So I'm going to start here with skim milk or fat-free. Why? Because the precious and perfect fats were removed. And that only leaves the milk sugar and the protein. It basically only leaves the inflammatory pieces of the milk puzzle. So healthy fats are anti-inflammatory, remember? So when we remove them, we don't have any other anti-inflammatory benefits. Healthy fats make hormones that decrease inflammation in the body. It's one of the reasons why I consume a higher fat diet. Not crazy, just a higher fat diet. I make sure that every time I eat, I have a good quality, healthy fat. And I also make sure that I divide my fats between saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats. And I do as much as I possibly can. It happens 100% at home, but when I go to restaurants, I don't have much control in avoiding trans fats or the processed refined oils like margarine and canola and soybean oil and cottonseed oil and all of that, okay? So the bottom of the heap, the milk products or dairy products that you just really have the least amount of nutrition is going to be that fat-free, that skim milk. The next worst choice is going to be the 1 and 2%, technically the low-fat milk. Well, that just means that 99 and 98% of that dairy product is milk sugar and casein and whey. Not so great. Moving on. Let's move up to half and half. Now, half and half is called half and half, but it's actually only 20% milk fat. Remember, milk fat is the good part of the dairy. It's the good stuff. You want it. It lowers inflammation in the body. But that means that half and half is really, honestly, 80% milk sugar and inflammatory proteins like casein and whey. I know now it's getting tricky, but let's take a step back and look at fermented dairy like kefir and yogurt and a lot of cheeses. Now, fermenting is a process of pre-digesting or breaking down food for an easier digestion process for our own bodies. This happens when microbes are introduced to the dairy and they're released into it. Now, I use microbes myself, but I allow them to naturally happen. I like to ferment my own foods. I prefer the fermentation method. This just naturally occurs in foods like cabbage once they're added to a salt brine. I don't add whey, that protein, or anything else to my fermented foods, but I let the bacteria do the work. Now, the bacteria that is added, these microbes that are added to products that are going to be kefirs or some soft cheeses and yogurts and aged cheeses, they actually absorb some of the milk sugar, which can make the dairy, the fermented dairy, it now makes it a fermented dairy, and can often be a better choice for a lot of people. So let's move on to butter. So full fat, grass-fed, pastured butter, cows that are out enjoying the sun. You think, I just got myself some full fat. This is nothing but fat. Well, actually, it's still 70 to 80% milk fat. That means there is a 20 or 30% component of your awesome, awesome butter that's still milk sugar and those troublesome proteins. So it just really depends on how sensitive you are. Now, if you have an autoimmunity and or you suffer from gluten sensitivity, and 98% of autoimmune patients do, then your body is still going to see those milk sugars and milk proteins like the casein and whey. They're going to see it and they're going to think it's gluten. So it just causes issues. So I really recommend go dairy-free if you have autoimmunity. We don't want to further the leaky gut issues. And I'm going to save a lot of the leaky gut issues and what that means in the long run for future episodes. So just kind of put that in the back of your mind. So last but not least, but top of the pile as far as a good or best choice if you're going to consume a dairy product would be ghee. Ghee is 99 to 100% milk fat. Finally, the proteins and the sugars have been cooked out. We used to actually call ghee, when I was growing up, clarified butter. I don't know how and when that changed. But when scientists test the type and ratio of fats that are found in a good pastured ghee, they find that perfect ratio again. 65% saturated fat, 30% monounsaturated fats, and 5% polyunsaturated fats. Yeah, can you believe that? There's like omegas, omega-3s and omega-6s in the proper proportion in a nice grass-fed, good quality ghee. Pretty awesome. You don't just have to get your omegas from your seafood and your seeds like flax. So can we go back to those indigenous people groups for just a second? Most of those cultures, they happen to use fermented dairy over just straight fresh milk from whatever mammal they're milking, be it donkey, yeah, that's actually a thing, camel, yak, cow, whatever. So kind of keep that in your mind. Those cultures that we want to say, well, what about these people? They're not lactose intolerant. Well, remember we talked about that enzyme lactase, and also they're mostly using fermented dairy, which is more easily digestible, hands down. Have you guys heard of Dr. David Perlmutter? He's a neurologist, a legit successful brain surgeon, and the author of a book called Brain Maker. I totally recommend this book, by the way. He was tired of treating the other end of brain issues, especially dementia. And he decided to really look into nutrition, and it's just a wonderful book. And he recommends, and actually has recipes for like do-it-yourself kefir using non-dairy forms of milk like coconut milks and almond milks. Highly recommend it. That's David Perlmutter, and his book is Brain Maker. So when you're out in the store and you're considering alternative milks like the coconut milks or almond milks, make sure you turn the label over and look at the back. Be sure that they didn't throw any extra sugar in, or I call them weirdo ingredients that have been added. I don't know why they do this, for color, for flavor, for shelf life, or whatever, but try and keep it as basic as you possibly can. Sugar's a real issue. Our bacteria absolutely loves sugar, especially the bad bacteria, including certain yeast. But we'll talk more about gut bacteria and the proper ratio and balance in that future episode. Now, another contributing factor to leaky gut is recurrent antibiotic use. I have even had friends in the past that literally, and I'm not joking here, always have some form of an antibiotic in their fridge. It's crazy. And why? Well, most of the time, it's because of ear infections and sinus infections. And there are many people way smarter than myself that often point a finger to dairy and ear infections. Is it the dairy or is it the antibiotics? I personally say it's the leaky gut. Considering that our gut is responsible for 60 to 80% of our immune function, that leaves a lot of opportunity for catching bacteria that cause ear infections. Now, what gives kids the leaky gut? Milk. I know a crap ton of kids that drink milk on a regular basis. Maybe not glass after glass, but certainly in processed foods. And processed foods, believe it or not, contain quite a bit of milk. In fact, they have altered milk, aka dairy, to the point in laboratories that I can't even hardly identify it on a label. It has so many different names, and none of them say like milk or anything that you can actually figure out. So, do your kids ever eat processed foods? Think processed foods are high in sugar, high in chemicals. If they are, your child has a higher rate at the very least, of having leaky gut. It's just what we're finding in our modern kids. And we are seeing it in the illness that's affecting our children. And I'm not just talking about diabetes, I'm talking about cancers. It's absolutely crazy how many children are struggling with what would have even been rare 40, 50 years ago for adults. And now we're seeing it so often in children. So what about genetics? I mentioned 40 or 50 years ago and how things have changed. I hope you've heard of Dr. Terry Wahls. She's a physician. She has MS herself, and she herself has put her autoimmune disease in remission with diet and lifestyle. And she does remind us that 20 to 30% of the population with European descent have a couple genes, the DQ2 and the DQ8 gene, which puts them at a higher risk for gluten sensitivity. Isn't that crazy? So remember that mimicry issue I was talking about with the casein and whey and gluten. So I'm looking at myself thinking, well, my mom has European descent. I also have, my dad is half Chinese and half Native American Indian. 80% of people with Asian ancestry have a dairy or lactose intolerance or sensitivity. 80%. So it's not looking good for me. And that also points to the gluten. That also points to the autoimmune disease that I have. Now, Dr. Wahls recommends giving up dairy totally if you have autoimmunity. It's just too risky on a daily or even every once in a while basis because it really inhibits the body's natural healing efforts. But why is it that dairy is so hard to give up? Why do people cringe? One reason is that gluten itself and casein, when we eat them, they increase our dopamine levels. This makes us feel good, and we get addicted to the high. And we have that same situation. Like, let's just talk about it this way. Gooey, cheesy pizza, ice cream, chocolate chip cookies, the gluten and the casein, they actually interact with the same receptors, and they stimulate the same receptors that opioids do. Literally. It's like we get a little high as if we had a narcotic. Dairy and gluten are both very addictive. So what kind of reactions or health symptoms? If you're saying, okay, Brandy, I want to try this out, but how do I know if I'm a candidate? What can I be one of those 25%? Well, I say, let's look at your health symptoms. Let's look at some of the burdens that you walk around with, right? What does it even look like to be sensitive to dairy? I'm going to give you a little list here of some conditions associated with gluten sensitivity and also dairy consumption. Things like allergies, asthma, autism, migraines, eczema, and other skin disorders like infertility, IBS, IBD, leaky gut, psoriasis, believe it or not, psychiatric disorders, and thyroid disease. These have all been associated with both gluten and dairy consumption. On a personal note, my life, for most of my life, I would have a small patch of eczema somewhere on my body. But the moment I gave up gluten, gone. And at this point, I only rarely consume dairy. Rarely. I couldn't even really put a number on it. If maybe feta accidentally comes on my salad, I don't worry about it. But I tell you what, I will partake of some extra digestive enzymes to help me out with that process. So I'm not saying that I'm certainly perfect. And I'm not even saying that I don't like dairy. I love dairy. I miss things like Parmesan cheese. I miss things like having a glass of wine and a cheese board, but it just isn't in alignment with my goals and how I want to feel every single day. And when I say goals, I fully believe, and I really kind of rather expect myself to reverse or at the very least halt the condition of my autoimmune disease. So, Dr. Wall's one last thing is she has shared in a lot of her research that in North America, gluten and casein sensitivity are some of the most common food sensitivities out there. Okay, so let's talk about a question that is super common when people are kind of defending, can I find some kind of dairy that's not going to be as harmful? And that next question is, but what about raw milk, Brandy? Well, even raw milk, I always say sadly, even raw milk still contains casein. The risk of most raw milks, in my mind, though, is that the consumer of that dairy product, whether it's a raw cheese or raw drinkable milk, you're really running the risk of transmitting an infection from an unhealthy cow. That's just kind of bottom line on that one. So what are some alternative dairy choices? You've decided, wow, I have an autoimmune disease. I need to take this seriously, or I can definitely identify with some of those symptoms or body burdens. Or maybe you're like some people that you just really notice that when you do even reduce the amount of dairy that you have in your life, that you notice changes in your health. What are some healthy and good tasting dairy alternatives? I always say look for almond milk, coconut, hemp, rice milk, and I say that with kind of parentheses if you can tolerate grain, because rice is a grain, and just like corn is a grain, and also soy milk. Now I say also in parentheses if that works for you. For me, grain tends to be very inflammatory for joint health in general, and since I have an inflammatory arthritis disease, then I typically avoid grain when I can. Now, what about dairy consumption after menopause? So I love to follow Dr. Sarah Gottfried. She's just awesome sauce. If you haven't followed her at all, she's got a bunch of stuff every day about hormones in general, and she's just a neat gal. And she's also a yoga instructor, so I just really kind of like her vibe. Now, Dr. Sarah Gottfried reminds us that dairy can raise estradiol levels, and that might be a good thing for some women. If you are postmenopausal, meaning you don't have your period anymore, you might like that little estrogen bump, right? But if you have the symptoms of someone with excess androgens, an androgen example would be testosterone, then Dr. Gottfried does suggest or recommends avoiding dairy and eggs. Isn't that interesting? Dairy and eggs actually increase your MMK. I'm not even going to bother to say that. It's a really super long word that you and I will never remember. But MMK drums up inflammation and further raises androgens. And androgens, when you have excess androgens like testosterone, they can give you adult acne and unwanted facial and chest hairs and also like itchy legs and restless leg syndrome. That's when going down and getting some good testing and looking at all of your hormones, which include your thyroid, your androgens, cortisol, progesterone, estrogen, and getting a real feel for where you lie. Now, if you're curious about your hormone balance and you don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money on the labs, because to be honest with you, the labs that your regular doctor is going to call typically aren't as in-depth, and the insurance companies, frankly, they just don't want to pay for them. So we end up doing it out of pocket. But those symptoms or those burdens on your body, you can go to my website at thepathforhealth.com. Right on the front page, you can take my hormone quiz. And you can see how your hormones kind of fall. And if some are really off the charts or really high, you can take that information into your doctor and say, This is why I would like this kind of testing and see what happens. Just gives you a little bit of extra evidence on your part because like most women, myself included, when we go in with a lot of these symptoms, they just blame it on our age. Like it's something that we just sorry that you lost on the you're a woman. This is the age that you are, and you're a woman. These are just things that you have to deal with. But that's not necessarily true. Just because something is common doesn't mean that it is natural and healthy and good. Let's talk about one of the arguments that I hear from a lot of people that say they consume dairy because of CLA. That's conjugated linoleic acid. This is a fatty acid, and it's a fatty acid that women love because it actually helps us to burn more fat. But I say, at what cost? Are you going to potentially burn fat only to increase inflammation and retain some extra water? Or have that list of asthma, eczema, headaches, bloating, digestive issues. Okay, so basically, if I were to make a recommendation, and I say this to all of my clients, depending on what their goals are and who they are as an individual and what their current health status is, I really recommend just trying it out. It doesn't cost you anything. You might even save some money. Try going off of all forms of dairy for 30 days. So, and if you try for 30 days, make sure that you journal. I'm talking about how you're sleeping, your body aches and pains, your digestion, your mood, your food cravings, all the stuff. Journal all the stuff and get a real good picture. And if you feel like there hasn't been much of a change and you kind of want to start putting dairy back into your diet, then I recommend starting with ghee and consider reintroducing it and see how your body does and keep your journaling. I'm actually doing that right now. I've reintroduced ghee and it seems to be working really, really well. And so I can still have that rich, beautiful butter flavor without all the sugar and the proteins. Absolutely love it. And then I get the healthful proteins and that perfect ratio that we were talking about earlier of the saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats. So you're never going to know how well or how poorly you do with dairy until you completely remove it. And it does help if you're also eating a very clean diet along the way. That way you're getting a good picture. So the case for dairy consumption remains a question really for the individual. And I hope you know who you are and what your body is dealing with. Do you have gut health issues? If so, to what extent? Do you have symptoms that point to immune dysfunction? Do you experience some of the telltale signs of a dairy intolerance or sensitivity? So I don't need a test to tell me if something, makes me feel good or bad because I'm in tune to my body. But you can do this free test all on your own anytime by just doing an elimination diet. So I will share this one tip, however, just like any other form of addiction, the threat of taking it away is real, sister. A defense mechanism will rise up. So food and emotions are so closely linked. I mean, have you ever been guilty of eating your feelings? What about eating out of boredom? Have you ever been full, but something just tasted so good that you ate more anyway? You just wanted it. That's how it is for a lot of people with dairy. So if you decide to do a 30-day trial, then be prepared for a fight. The dairy addiction is real. Just like giving up alcohol or coffee, sugar, screen time, porn. You're going to need to work your way through it and keep your eye on the prize. So in my experience, it's roughest for about the first 2 weeks. And then the physical symptoms start to go away, and it's really only the emotional ones and the habits that are kind of still around. But it's still really important to deal with it and work all the way through to the end. Lastly, I just want to talk about the reason why those physical symptoms need to be addressed is that detoxification is actually really stressful on the body. I mean, even though it's good and it's a natural process, it does require work. So, you might want to work with somebody like myself, like a nutritionist that can give you kind of a little bit of heads up or something that will kind of ease you through the process. There's plenty of education out there. I hope that this was educational for you. And really, let me know if you decide to take up like a 30-day dairy challenge. The best way to get a hold of me is just to direct message me over at Instagram. I post more stories than I do just to my regular feed, but you can definitely message me over there. You can also find me at thepathforhealth.com. I try and keep that nice and current as well. And I'm just excited for you. This is a interesting change for a lot of people. More than a few times. I'm telling you, I don't even know how many times when I have women that are looking to maybe lose that final 10 or 15 pounds. This is usually the straw that breaks that camel's back. Dairy is so inflammatory, and they do so well on so many other aspects of their health. They're managing their stress. They're picking better foods with the exclusion of dairy. They have a sleep priority and schedule. They have detoxed out their environment of people, and they're hanging around with uplifting people and getting rid of toxic activities and environments in their life. They've really worked at opening up, whether it's journaling or whatever, to deal with some of that inner stress and those thoughts that are in our mind, to tell the difference between what is true and what are just our feelings lying to us, which doesn't necessarily make something true. People have gone through the process of a lot of health protocols and restoring their health. They're exercising appropriately for their age and their season and their daily health makeup. And sometimes they just feel like they're still dealing with some nagging things. Maybe it is a daily headache. Maybe it is still like alternating from diarrhea to constipation. It's just like something just isn't right. Boom, we take dairy away for a little bit and they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't do this earlier. You get that inflammation out of your body. And it's really incredible. It feels great. Your joints feel good. Your energy is better. You just feel clearer in your head. Being chronically and systemically inflamed is just no good. It is stressful on the inside and out. There's just no other way to look at it. So thank you for taking your time and listening to the Path for Health today. Please share this with other people. I always say or remind people, what is the old adage, like a prophet is never respected in their own town? If you have a family member or a friend that you really feel could benefit from this, or you want to encourage to maybe do a 30-day dairy challenge with you, then shoot them over this. Let me tell them, me being one of the experts that studies under other experts, and just parcels up this information into bite-sized pieces so that we can understand it better. Let them listen for themselves, and they can make that decision on their own, because that's where true behavior changes happen. Is if you really believe something, then you are going to change your behavior to address an outcome or a wanted outcome. All right, have a wonderful day. Thank you again, and I will see you next week on the Path for Health. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I know I did. There's always so much to learn, digest, and apply. My passion is to share the wealth of information and experience that I have learned and am continuing to learn. If you find that you're struggling with your health and need some help, I am totally here for you. I have many different programs and platforms to help you get to where you want to go. I am currently taking clients both online and in person, and I also offer self-paced courses as well as live and online small group classes. Also, each month I hold a live webinar with a different theme, and most recently I created a VIP Restore Experience membership platform. The VIP experience is exclusive content that I organize and share only with VIP members. It is a monthly opportunity to receive educational and inspirational material that no one else is getting unless they are a member. Each month, I organize a 60-minute live video chat that allows a little bit of Q&A along with the teaching. It is so fun. The best part is that each month, your mailbox will find new recipes, product demos, cooking demonstration, tips, and more. The super cool part about the VIP Restore experience is that for the next 3 months, I'm doing what I call a beta test group, because this is a new program. So the membership is only $15 a month. You can head over to thepathforhealth.com to get more information and sign up. There's no contract, so try it out. Make sure you're also signed up for my monthly newsletter, the blog, and the podcast. Staying plugged in is key to helping you stay on track with your goals. You can also find me personally on Facebook, Instagram, and most recently, TikTok. That's a blast. Thank you again for listening. I'm Brandy Lloyd on The Path for Health. I'll see you next time.